Welcome to our online audience. My name is Jim Moran. I'm a senior fellow here at the Centre for European Policy Studies. As you know, we're going to be talking about AUKUS, the EU, and Asia more generally in this debate today. A very important time to have it because in a couple of weeks' time there is the ASEM Asia-Europe meeting summit coming up, where a lot of these issues will come up, certainly amongst the leaders from all sides of Europe and Asia. Just by way of a little background, you'll remember a couple of months ago, President Biden, Prime Ministers Morrison and Johnson announced a new pact called AUKUS, which in their words was aimed at ensuring peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific over the long term. A lot of people, including in Beijing, saw it as a response to China's rise as a military force, as a security force in the region. Just about the same time, shortly after that, and a little bit, it seemed blindsided by that announcement, the EU set out a new strategy for the region, and the immediate consequence was, of course, made the news in a big way, still making the news, that France lost one of the largest defense contracts in its history, the supply of conventionally powered submarines to Australia, Canberra switching to buy nuclear-powered subs from the US. The reaction from Paris was pretty furious, recalling its ambassadors to Washington and Canberra. They've since returned, and crying foul, not least because they had no prior knowledge of the announcement. Without wanting to make a very bad pun, relations took a dive in a serious way between France and Australia and the US. And of course, the issue rapidly became Europeanized. France saying that the EU needed to put more effort into its attempts to create more strategic autonomy for itself. A number of member states gave unqualified support for Paris. Ursula von der Leyen said it was the treatment of France was unacceptable, and many people, commentators and others, and not a few politicians either, pointed to AUKUS as another sign that Europe couldn't trust its US ally, and again, needed to do something about its own abilities to contribute to strategic stability. Some others in the European Union took a different position, probably worried about criticizing the US too much. And another consequence of it seems to be, but we'll hear more about that a bit later, that the very important EU-Australia FTA was sidelined, at least for the moment. There have been two postponements since the announcement on AUKUS of talks, so far as that FTA is concerned, although the Commission has since said that re-engagement should be possible in February. But that's to be seen. We'll come back to that in a moment. So there's quite a bit of damage that's been done by this, some of it probably due to clumsy diplomacy. After all three AUKUS parties and the EU, both institutions and member states, are pretty close allies. And normally you would expect this sort of thing to be avoided, but it doesn't seem to have happened here. That is worrying, I think, a concern for everyone. Something went wrong with the diplomatic process here. Maybe our speakers can say something about that. Both the US and Australia moved quickly to clean up the mess, and we've seen reassurances from President Biden to President Macron. Mr. Blinken has been in Paris. The Australian Prime Minister has spoken with Mr. Macron as well. So there have been some damage limitation exercises, but it leaves a fairly sour taste in the mouth. But for all of that, whatever the notions of strategic autonomy may be, and they are many, must be said from the European point of view, our strategic capabilities in the Indo-Pacific are limited. In fact, very limited in many cases. Our ability to ensure, for example, freedom of navigation in the region, which is so important for those critical trading relationships, depends crucially on cooperation with the US, by far the most important strategic actor in the region, and indeed, to a lesser extent perhaps, but still important, like-minded partners like Australia and Japan. So unpacking all of this is difficult, but we've got three great speakers to give us a hand to do that, and hopefully to have a good debate afterwards. So I'm going to start with Gabrielle Vincent, who is the EU Special Envoy for the Indo-Pacific. and to tell us a little bit about the new strategy. How does AUKUS relate to all of that? Will it play in the upcoming ASEAN summit on the 25th, which will group all the players around the table, as I said, and he's ideally placed to do that. He'll be followed by David Dutton, the Deputy Head of Mission of the Australian Embassy, who's next to me here, and Valerie Niquet, who joins us from Tokyo, who is a very senior and well-known, respected analyst of strategic matters in Asia. So if you want to make points, and I hope you will, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions, and I'll do my best to put them to our speakers after they finish their presentations. So with that, I'm sorry for the long introduction, but it's a pretty big part of the world to try to cover in one of these things. So I'm going to turn it over to Gabrielle Vincent. Gabrielle, please, if you would, over to you.
Thanks a lot, James. Hi, hello to everybody. Well, you said it all in your introduction, so I will maybe just say a couple of words on the EU strategy for the Indo-Pacific, and maybe I will keep the comments on AUKUS as my closing remarks, if you agree. So basically, the Indo-Pacific is acknowledged as the future, the world center of gravity. We all heard of this, both in geoeconomic and geopolitical terms. Just allow me to give you a couple of interesting figures, which could serve as evidence of the importance that the Indo-Pacific has for the EU. So, 60% of global GDP and 2/3 of global growth come from Indo-Pacific. 40% of the global trade towards the European Union pass through the Indo-Pacific. And by 2030, 90% of the 2.4 billion of people who will join the middle class will come from the Indo-Pacific region. So these are figures which are striking for their relevance and importance in geoeconomic and geopolitical terms. And last but not least, and that will link as well with the relevance of AUKUS, is the fact that the EU has around 2 million citizens resident on EU soil in the region. So the EU is also a resident actor in the Indo-Pacific, and most of them are French national, residing on French soil. And and France not only has this number of citizens there, but there's also a lot of troops and military assets in the zone. So just to set the frame, we presented our Indo-Pacific strategy on the 16th of September. It's basically the main feature of it is that we would like. It aims at keeping the Indo-Pacific as open and rules-based. The EU has a big stake in the region's future, and we also have a big contribution to make in all the aspects. And this is recognized by our partners who view the EU as a trusted and consistent and reliable partner. It comprises 7 priority areas, all of them interlinked. I will not bore with them. I will just quickly mention the first is sustainable and inclusive prosperity with all the economic and trade cooperation bit. Then we have the green transition, which is even more important after COP26. Ocean governance, including the pollution of the oceans and the fight against illegal fisheries, and of course the access to maritime routes. Then digital governance and partnerships, which include also cooperation on research and development, connectivity, or as we will have to change in EU terms, global gateways connectivity, which is the name of the new policy that the policy documents that the EU will issue in December. Then the chapter on security and defense. That's the biggest novelty of the EU strategy on the Indo-Pacific. It's the first time where a joint communication of the Commission and the HRBP comes out with the security and defense. And this is extremely relevant. If you couple it with the discussion that yesterday the ministers of defense had on the strategic compass, and in that also there is the Indo-Pacific is mentioned in many parts. And then last but not least, the chapter on human security, which talks about the preparedness to counter pandemics, the COVID-19, COVAX support, the financial support to the national health systems of the countries concerned, and then also the ways to counter the natural catastrophes and to establish a rapid response mechanism to the natural catastrophes. So these are the 7 areas of priorities of action for the EU. So all of them reinforce each other. We can maybe discuss later on, but the focus today is not about the Indo-Pacific strategy. So it is really a policy, a comprehensive way of looking at the Indo-Pacific, which brings together all the policies that the EU has at its disposal in the region. They are brought up under the same strategic umbrella, and we, for the first time, look at them in a comprehensive way. What is important to realize is that the Indo-Pacific strategy does not substitute our bilateral relations with member states. So this is not a strategy which changes our bilateral relations with Japan or with Indonesia, or with Korea, or with Australia. It is a comprehensive way of looking at the challenges and the opportunities of the region. We set up a motto for the Indo-Pacific strategy, which is cooperate whenever possible and protect whenever necessary. And that explains all the 7 priorities I told you. So this, a little bit in a nutshell, the Indo-Pacific strategy from the EU on AUKUS. First of all, the timing was a bit unfortunate from our point of view, because AUKUS was announced exactly on the eve of the day where the EU strategy was announced. So that was already, the timing for the presentation was not extremely well chosen. Today here I will have to reiterate the official position of the EU as it was expressed already by President von der Leyen or by High Rep Borrell. So the EU is strongly disappointed at the lack of prior consultations and information. We consider that the EU as an ally, as a partner, as a friend, should have been, if not consulted, at least informed. And we consider that there is the need to talk before taking initiatives that have direct impact and direct consequences on us all. So France has been a driving force and mentor of the EU's policy shift to enhance cooperation with the Indo-Pacific region. Again, announcing AUKUS on the very day where the EU had planned to announce its own strategy was most unfortunate, and some interpret it as a deliberate act. We of course regret the cancellation of a signed contract by the Australian government. And the positive side, we have to say that the joint statement of 22nd September of President Biden and Macron was an important step to clarify the situation. The 2 leaders agreed that the situation would have benefited from open consultations among partners, and President Biden conveyed his ongoing commitment in that regard. Also, the following week, there was a statement by Quad where the EU Indo-Pacific strategy was welcome, and it was indicated the will to cooperate with the EU on that. So In our interactions with Australia, and I see David there, David Dutton, my friend with whom I have close ties and contacts, we have indicated that we would welcome if Australia would take a similar commitment as the US did. When the situation allows, and following the phone call between Prime Minister Morrison and President Macron on 28th October, then it would be beneficial and advisable from our side that substantive discussions with Paris are undertaken and that confidence is rebuilt. And we saw that the communique after the call had established basically three possible avenues for talks, which was the first, the financial consequences of the cancellation of the contract, the second, the ways to restore cooperation and trust, and then the third, the wish that Australia could take bold initiatives in terms of climate change prevention. So this is basically all I could say on AUKUS, and I pass on the word to you, James. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Gabrielle, and thanks for outlining the elements of the strategy as well and making those points. I think maybe now we can turn to David Dutton from the Australian Embassy here to give us a view of the situation, and particularly, I think, to tell us more about the AUKUS deal itself. It's not just about nuclear submarines. And of course, there are common interests there as well, in the longer term, perhaps, between the parties to AUKUS and the European Union and its member states. So I think that would be important to talk about too. And also to give us the Australian perspective, perhaps, on the prospects for this very important free trade agreement. After all, we have to remember that the figures are quite impressive. The trade between EU and Australia, I think, is around 60 to 70 billion a year at the moment, with well over 100 billion of investments two-way. And the impact studies all show that both sides stand to gain a third, if ever the thing is agreed. Well, it's not going to be agreed anytime soon. We've lost time, we've lost momentum, and I suspect we've lost trust. Gabrielle, you mentioned the question of trust. It also comes into this format too. How can we best restore it? David, maybe you can tell us a bit more.
Well, look, thank you very much, Jim, and to Seps for the invitation to participate today, and it's a pleasure to be here with Gabrielle and Valerie as well. So I look forward to the discussion. What I might do is say a little bit about what AUKUS is, and by doing so also kind of what it isn't, and the strategic context for it from our perspective. Then I'll just comment a bit on the question about Australia's relationships with France and the EU and our interests in working together in the Indo-Pacific. I'll maybe pick up the FTA for a moment at the end, and then I'm sure we'll take the conversation forward from there. So I think the starting point here in the Australian outlook is the strategic environment in the Indo-Pacific, the strategic environment on which Australia looks out is changing more rapidly than at any point, at least since the end of the Cold War. And in a number of respects, we see it as deteriorating. And we see a rules-based system under kinds of unprecedented strain. We have in all of our kind of foreign and security policy across the range of initiatives which Australia has sort of come forth with over the last few years in our relationships with many states, we have come to all of that with a vision of the kind of region that we would like to see. And that region is one which is open, secure, resilient, and prosperous, a region in which states interact cooperatively, free of coercion, and in which the sovereignty of all states is protected and respected, regardless of their size, whether big or small. That shares a very great deal, I think, with the EU's own vision, both for the Indo-Pacific and for the globe as a whole. Now, we see AUKUS as one initiative among many others that support this vision, and it's complementary to many of the other things that Australia has been doing. I'd mention in particular, we see this complementary to all the new effort that has gone into the Quad and to the cooperation among those 4 countries. It is complementary to our relationships with ASEAN and to our work in the ASEAN regional architecture, the ASEAN-based regional architecture. We think AUKUS will make Australia a more capable partner and will be able to contribute more to security in the region. Now, the first major initiative of AUKUS, which is where all the attention has been, of course, has been Australia's decision to acquire nuclear-powered, conventionally armed submarines, for which the Royal Australian Navy will operate in future. And we see the capability of nuclear-powered submarines being a significant enhancement for Australia's ability to deter threats and to maintain our capability edge in the region. At the same time, AUKUS is going to enable better collaboration, more collaboration on defence science and research, education, technology, and on the industrial base. Now, this enhancement of our defence capability is something that Australia is pursuing transparently and with the very clear purpose of ensuring the region remains stable, secure, and free of coercion. Now, I just draw attention briefly at this point as well to that. So AUKUS was announced on the 16th of September, as Gabrielle has mentioned. The 16th of September was also the day on which Australia and the United States held our annual 2+2 meeting, which we call OSMIN. There's a long statement from that, mentions AUKUS, but it contains a number of other sort of further commitments in deepening our own alliance relationship. And I draw particular attention in that context to sort of other important decisions to take forward enhanced force posture collaboration, under which there will be greater air, maritime and land cooperation between Australia and the United States. Decision to establish a combined logistics, sustainment and maintenance enterprise is mentioned. There are new announcements from our ministers on defence technology and procurement. So there is this related and connected growth of our collaboration in the military domain with the United States, which is all there for you to read about in the statement. Now, let me just say a few things about the submarines and the non-proliferation aspects. So submarines are an essential part of Australia's naval capability, and they provide strategic advantages in terms of surveillance and protection of our maritime approaches. Nuclear-powered submarines offer superior characteristics in a number of ways: stealth, speed, maneuverability, much longer endurance when compared to conventional submarines, and they can do more in terms of deploying underwater vehicles and carrying more advanced technologies. So these abilities allow nuclear-powered submarines to operate in contested areas with a lower risk of detection and to deter actions against Australia's interests. Over the next 18 months, as the President and the 2 Prime Ministers announced, the 3 countries will intensively examine all of the requirements needed to deliver these submarines for Australia in future. Australia will leverage the technology, capability and design expertise from our 2 partners in determining how to take this project forward. Now, let me just turn to the non-proliferation aspect, which the Prime Minister has spoken to. It was, of course, been spoken to as well in the initial announcement. And as a number of you will know, Australia is a particularly ardent member of the non-proliferation community and has been over many decades. Australia will continue to meet all of our obligations under the NPT and the various instruments and agreements that exist under the IAEA and its safeguarding regimes. Now, the NPT doesn't speak or prohibit nuclear propulsion for naval purposes, But we are quite conscious that Australia will need to be and is determined to be a responsible steward of this technology in the future. So we're committed to adhering to the highest standards of safeguards, transparency, verification, accountancy measures, and so forth, to ensure that all of our non-proliferation commitments are met. Australia and our two partners, the UK and the US, have already advised the IAEA Director General and the Board of Governors these plans, and there'll be processes within that forum. And just to mention, while I'm on the non-proliferation aspect, we're also conscious of obligations under the CPPNN, or the Convention for the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material, and we'll need to work closely there too to ensure that there is sophisticated safety and security around the submarine technology. Australia, as some of you may know, has a nuclear research reactor in Sydney, which it's had since the 1950s, but does not have a civil nuclear industry. We have no plans to create one, and the Prime Minister's been quite very clear, very completely explicit about that. So let me just say a little quickly on the broader aspects of AUKUS, and Jim mentioned this. And in fact, just today, earlier today, Prime Minister Morrison gave a speech at which he said more about this. So let me just give you a little of what he has said today, and it's which elaborate from the initial announcement. So AUKUS was intended, is intended, and will produce collaboration in more than just the nuclear submarine project. The three countries, within AUKUS, the three countries will promote deeper information sharing, foster greater integration of security and defence-related science, technology, industrial bases, supply chains, strengthen our cooperation in advanced and critical technologies. This will enhance our joint capabilities and interoperability. There'll be an initial focus on cyber capabilities, AI, quantum, and undersea. And there is a work plan under preparation among officials, which will come back to leaders within 90 days. And that work plan will set out how we will exchange information, personnel, technology, in all of these areas. The Prime Minister's remarks you can easily find on the internet. It's a big agenda. This is an important and valuable additional partnership that will drive, certainly for Australia, our technology and capability cooperation to meet the needs of the challenges of the 21st century in our strategic environment. So that's kind of AUKUS. Let me just then turn, I'm sorry to, I hope I'm not taking too long. I'll talk a little bit about the implications for our relationships here in Europe, and then conclude. Now, of course, much has been said since the announcement of AUKUS. There were many reactions, a lot of comment and analysis. I'm not going to try to sort of rehash any of that. I'm sure we'll explore some of the dimensions in the conversation that follows. The decision that Australia made to pursue and go ahead with the partnership to acquire a nuclear-powered submarine was based on a very careful, long and sober analysis of the strategic situation in the region and of what our needs will be, not just today, but over the decades to come, given the very long procurement and development cycles of military capabilities. It was a difficult decision, but one that was made in Australia's best strategic interests. And we understand and understood that the decision and the decision not to proceed further with the contract that Australia had with the Naval Group for conventionally powered submarines, that the loss of that contract would be disappointing for France. Our focus now is on moving forward in all of our relationships. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, in fact, addressed the Lowy Institute group last week, making much the same kind of point, that his focus as National Security Advisor, and I think this is true of us as well, is to look forward. We'll be moving forward with AUKUS, but moving forward also with our other important relationships. Now, Australia very much values its relationships with France and with the European Union, both of which are critical partners and vital contributors for stability around the globe, but very much including in the Indo-Pacific. That hasn't changed, and it's not going to change. We are pleased to continue working with France on our many issues of shared interest and based on our shared values. And of course, you've seen in the public domain some of how that conversation. Now, with the EU, which is what I have some responsibility for here as part of our mission to the EU, it was an accident of the timing of the announcement that OSMIN, our 2+2 meeting, and the EU's announcement of its Indo-Pacific strategy took place on the same day. And that has led to a number of erroneous conclusions being drawn in some quarters. But the timing was accidental, as the High Representative has himself acknowledged. For Australia, and I want to be particularly clear about this, we are very strongly supportive of the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy. We have been very closely engaging through its development with the EAS, with the member states, around the institutions. From an Australian perspective, we both need and want the EU's weight in the Indo-Pacific. The challenges that we face are great and growing. The magnitude of those challenges can't be met by any of us alone, certainly not by a middle-sized country like Australia. All of our thinking is based around how we work with others to try to achieve that region that I mentioned at the outset, a region which is based in a durable strategic balance, and one governed by rules and cooperative relations between states. The EU has lots to bring to this challenge. So from here, we'll be looking to extend and increase our work with the EU. Gabrielle has mentioned many of the dimensions of the Indo-Pacific joint communication. There are many of those areas in which there is more that Australia and the EU can do together to mutual benefit and to the benefit of the partners that we'll be working with in the region. I think in the time that I've been in Brussels so far, I think it's quite clear that Australia and the EU are becoming more important partners for one another because of the trend of geopolitical events and because our outlook on the geopolitical challenges we have so much in common in our outlooks, which come ultimately from kind of shared values, shared systems of governance, and these deep similarities in the nature of our societies, economies, and and the kind of world that we each want to live in. Now, you mentioned the FTA, so let me just mention briefly. I think, as you said, Jim, the Commission decided that to postpone negotiation postpone the next round, which will be the 12th round. It was due in October. It will now take place in February. I think we understand the reasons for that. Look, from our point of view, an FTA between Australia and the EU has the potential to be an important and mutually advantageous agreement which would take forward our economic relations. There are opportunities to help our businesses grow and to help trade and investment grow further, which are, although they're already quite significant, as you, I think, mentioned, in sort of aggregate terms. The EU is Australia's second largest two-way trading partner, if you add up the member states together. But of course, any FTA is a deal between two parties, or 2 + 27 through the Commission, and at the end of the day, it has to be mutually advantageous. Our expectation all along has been that we would, over a period of time, work towards such an agreement. We believe that is possible, and we remain sort of committed to take those negotiations forward. we had not expected that the FTA would be concluded this year. It's been making steady progress, but there is further to go. So we look forward to continuing those discussions. But I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was, I think, pretty comprehensive, giving us the view from the Antipodes. Now, I'm going to ask Valerie to come in now. And maybe, Valerie, you can tell us a little bit about the reactions there in the region to the AUKUS announcement. There's some questions coming in now, by the way. And please, I encourage you, put your questions on whenever they occur to you, and we'll take them up with the speakers after Valerie has given her presentation. But give us an idea, Valerie, if you will, of the reaction in the region. I expect that the reaction from Japan might be rather different from that of China. Anyway, over to you.
Yes, of course. But just before, we talked a lot, of course, about AUKUS. I just wanted to add a few things to what has already been said. I really trust by the common interest and partnership between Australia and France and the EU are extremely important. All the more so because France is one of the closest neighbors of Australia. Many people forget about it, but because of the Pacific territories, and apparently, I don't know what will happen after the referendum in New Caledonia, but it seems that it will be in favor of staying with France. So, I mean, as Macron said quite often, in a kind of maybe too grandiloquent tone, said that France is here to stay in the Pacific. And we have a lot of cooperation ongoing with Australia and South Pacific and Pacific Islands countries. So this is an important point to make to demonstrate that we indeed have working relationship with Australia, and that will not disappear with AUKUS. But of course, AUKUS poses a lot of problem too. We tackled the way it was announced. I think it was extremely poorly managed, and it also raises a question of trust, not only because how it was announced, but also how it was dealt with inside, for instance, the US administration. Who was aware, who was in charge, and it increases the lack of trust some may have in the decision-making capability of some in US administration too, not only in Australia. So the way Joe Biden was apparently surprised, which is a little bit unnerving when you speak of the President of the United States, to be surprised and telling it's not us, it's Australian didn't manage it very well. So there is a kind of confusion there, which is not reassuring, I must say. The other thing is AUKUS has been presented as a kind of game changer vis-à-vis China, but it's very long term. I mean, even though things happen in between, this submarine, you mentioned the difficulties. I mean, Australia for now has no nuclear capability. The questions about the kind of fuel management, these are huge questions, and it's a very long-term thing. And actually, China's threat is for now. Is, as many people say, it's now in the years to come, and plus it is multi-dimensional. You have, of course, a military threat from China. Military capability are increasing, naval capabilities, nuclear capabilities are increasing too. China is building up its capacity of area denial against the US. They would like the US not to intervene in the region. So this is extremely preoccupying. I'm not sure AUKUS in 30 years will solve, or even if there are some logistic cooperation or whatever in between, will solve that issue. But there are also other dimensions of the China threat: economic, diplomatic. Australia knows very well that China uses trade, for instance, as a tool against any country that to put pressure on. And for all these threats, France and Europe are extremely important. And AUKUS gave, according to my thinking, a bad argument for China to use and to try to divide allies. I'm not saying it will happen. EU and France, we have interest in the Indo-Pacific. That will not change. And we're certainly not on the way to side with China against the US or Australia or whatever. But still, China is using AUKUS, you know, speaking of a new kind of multilateralism and against hegemonism and so on. Plus, it was said that AUKUS would be a deterrent against China. This is not what we have seen. The announcement, after the announcement of AUKUS, China increased its military gesticulation in Taiwan's ADs, you know, a lot of provocation in terms of discourse. But at the same time, we saw also the US and Xi Jinping, Joe Biden and Xi Jinping having quite a nice, I mean, frank, but still 3-hour talk between themselves. A new kind of G2, coming back of the G2, or dealing with, you know, the situation, not to see the situation evolve into something that couldn't be controlled. So there is ambiguity here also. On one side, you dangle AUKUS like, you know, beware, you know, the US are back. By the way, the US were there already. And AUKUS is also the negative, one of the negative points is that to have France on board with the submarine deals with Australia was good because it was a plus. You know, a European country, today one of the most important military power in Europe, on board was very important, and it played a role when France decided to launch its own Indo-Pacific strategy. It was very important. It was a very important role. But with AUKUS, you retract something. Of course, some people said that the UK means that Europe is on board, but the UK is not Europe anymore. It's not the EU anymore. It's a European country eager to really tilt to Asia with its own agenda, but it's not Europe. So I think AUKUS was retracting something and not adding something. You know, it was a kind of retractation around this, what people call Anglosphere or whatever, which brings me to the reaction in the region. Of course, let's forget about China. Of course, China was against AUKUS, but it could use it also as a way to show, look, you know, you cannot trust the US and the alliance are weak and so on. And as I said before, it was not deterred from using military gesticulation against Taiwan, for instance. But Japan support, I mean, there were declarations for Japan to support AUKUS because Japan, of course, is in favor of everything that anchors the US more in the region. So Japan is all for AUKUS. But still, questions are asked about, and so what about the position of Japan? There are many bilateral alliances in the region, and particularly US-Japan has always been presented as a core of the security in the region. And now you have AUKUS. So some in Japan, not all, but some experts are asking, what about us? What are we for the US? Is AUKUS more important? Is Japan alliance a core of US involvement in the region? So this is a question for Japan. You mentioned Quad. Quad is very important. But India, for instance, some in India are not really, how do you say, agree with that kind of division of labor that seems to appear between hard security AUKUS and softer security Quad with vaccine, maritime safety, all many nice things. But actually, India is under China threat, even much more military threat, much more than Australia in a way. India is much closer to China than Australia. The distance between Australia and China is the same as between Europe and China. So it means that India feels maybe a little bit left over or wondering about what Quad means with AUKUS. So all this is, AUKUS is raising a lot of questions in my view. and doesn't bring a lot of immediate solution. Maybe in the longer term, maybe it's good for Australia to have nuclear submarine. It's a very difficult thing to build unless Australia decides that you will not do it yourself and just accept, US or UK submarines, or, to be a kind of, so it means that there will be also questions regarding what would Australia do if there is indeed conflict in the Taiwan Strait. I don't see it in the near future, because I think that China, some in China at least, know that it might be very well the end of the Chinese regime if they launch an attack against Taiwan. But still, what will be the posture of Australia in case of a real action in the Taiwan Strait and China attacking Taiwan, for instance? And it doesn't solve the issue that Australia today has with China, based on embargoes and economic pressure and so on. So I will not go further, maybe in the Q&A part, but it was just a few remarks regarding, plus of course on non-proliferation. You know that the closest allies in the region, New Zealand, it poses a problem, nuclear submarines, for Indonesia too. So again, it raises a lot of questions, and I do not see a lot of answers with AUKUS. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valerie. That was very provocative and interesting, and has given rise, as indeed have the other comments made by the speakers, to a number of questions. So I'm going to try and group a few of them together, and maybe the speakers would like to react. The first one coming in, which is talking about how would the speakers, how would you define what AUKUS is? It's not a treaty as far as one can tell. It's called, I think, by many a pact. How binding are the commitments that are made in it? And if it's intended to contribute to a rules-based order, those sorts of questions, I think, would be rather important. So what is the legal basis, if any, for it? Maybe all three speakers would like to react. I'm sure perhaps David might have a word on that. And related to that, why is it necessary, one of our audience asks, to include the UK in all of this? Is it more to do with the domestic situation in the UK than it is with anything else? I have my views about that, but I shall keep them to myself for now, because otherwise I will put myself in some difficulty if I start on that. But maybe the speakers might like to ask that too. It was in fact quite indicative, wasn't it, that France decided to withdraw its ambassadors from Canberra and from Washington, but not from London. That tells us something, perhaps. Anyway, over to the speakers. Maybe David first.
Sure. Well, I think AUKUS is an enhanced it's a security relationship between the three countries. It exists in the form of the published statement that the three leaders launched, and it looks, it anticipates, and as I mentioned, there will be more cooperation will grow under this work plan as these different lines of effort are fleshed out and taken forward. So, I can't speak to how any of that might look in terms of its legal form or what kind of agreements might be needed to give effect to particular things in future. But it's an enhanced partnership in military technology between three countries which are very closely we have an alliance relationship with the United States. We've had a close relationship in defence with the United Kingdom for many years. So it is it grows, it adds and grows from the long and very substantial relationships that we already have. In terms of the UK's participation, I would note that the United States has only shared the technology for nuclear propulsion of submarines with one other state previously. That state was the United Kingdom. And as has been set out, there will now be a very detailed exercise to figure out what would be the best option for Australia, and how we would sort of share technology among the countries to enable Australia to develop a submarine that best fits its needs, and the UK brings value to that.
Thanks, David. Gabrielle, has the EU had a chance yet to look at these aspects of the AUKUS agreement? Have the lawyers been looking at it to see how it all fits into the system? I mean, this is never forget that the EU is an état de droit. Would you have a comment on this?
Well, yes. The EU is not part of AUKUS, and the UK is not a member state anymore. So allow me not to comment. Thank you.
Fair enough. Valerie?
Yeah, I think it was mentioned that you don't need a treaty with AUKUS because all these countries are already related by some treaties, so you don't need to call that a new treaty. And for instance, you have also around Australia, you have AUKUS. AUKUS has not been cancelled; it still exists, and you have bilateral defense treaties. So this is the point I was trying to make. What, except the submarine side, what does AUKUS add that did not exist before, and that could have been built upon, you know, without retracting a new partner like France and Europe. So this is the point. I mean, what is that new thing? Why is the urgency for AUKUS? I understand China perfectly. I mean, I agree completely. But why now? Some people, of course, we didn't mention it, but the necessity after Afghanistan maybe to demonstrate that the US were really back to, I mean, the pivot or the rebalance to Asia policy was, it was a concretization of that policy decided by Obama a long time ago. And maybe it played a role, of course, even though I know that AUKUS had been discussed before Afghanistan. But still, the necessity to show that we are here. You can trust us in Asia. We will not move, and we are building a very strong alliance or whatever. But all this already existed in a way and could have been improved, maybe developed without the necessity to suddenly announce that very, very narrow, I'm sorry, narrow format that has been a surprise, of course, for France and Europe, but also for some countries in Asia.
Thank you, Valerie. Related to this, another question has come in. It's a series of points here, saying that, in fact, the arrangement might not really be in the Australian taxpayers' interest, saying that Australia will lose much of the 60% of the work share in Australia, which was required under the contract with Naval, and going on and talking about the difficulties of trust and the fact that Australian foreign policy is going to be even more, perhaps unhealthily aligned to an extent which was not the case in the past with that of the United States. I don't know, one other point which I didn't raise before and I should add it in is that I think, David, you did mention this in passing, but what's the position vis-a-vis liability compensation for cancellation of the contract with France? A bit of a bundle there. Would you like to comment?
I'm not sure I can answer all of those things. I mean, certainly, I mean, in terms of the government's intentions that to take forward Australia's own defence industry and industrial base, there are the Prime Minister's announcements. Sort of make some commitments there to build. And take forward parts of the technology, the construction in Australia. And now there is this 18-month process to figure out sort of next steps in submarines. So I don't think there's a lot to add to that at this stage. So you had your next question. I've just lost my thread on.
Compensation.
Well, I don't think I can speak to that. I mean, there's that's a matter for between the Australian government and the contracting partners between the Naval Group, and there will be a process according to the contract to resolve those issues.
I think it has been said publicly that it's under consideration. It's on the table, right? I mean,
So what is on?
financial compensation under the contract is on the table. I think it was mentioned somewhere by the Australian side. I'm not sure whether.
Look, I can't give you any accurate, so any specific information on that. I too have read things, but I'm not an expert on that aspect.
Fair enough, and neither am I. Okay, thank you. So let us move on. I think you mentioned India, Valerie, in all of this. Have you actually seen a specific reaction from the Indian side? This would be my question to you. On all of this, you did mention the worries that, of course, India has with its border problems with China. We're well aware of that. There have been wars fought over the years, and there may be more tension than there has been in the past. India, of course, also has been spoken about as a possible entrant into the Five Eyes system. There's been some talk about that, loose talk perhaps, but it has been there. But I'm interested, as we're talking here about the Indo-Pacific, to shift the focus a little bit across there to the Indian side. What can you say about the Indian reactions?
Well, actually, about the Indian government, I think it was, not hostile to AUKUS, but also India has been facing in recent months, even if it's apparently better now, a lot of problems related to COVID and so on. So, but when you talk to some experts in India, especially the one who focus very much on the China threat, that India is feeling very much. I mean, there were military incidents only recently at the border, and still the border is not completely stabilized between India and China. For some experts in India, apparently, the worry is that AUKUS is very much centered around, yes, the US, Australia, UK. It's always a delicate issue also, but quite far away from the Indian Ocean and from the border, I mean, from the situation that India has with China. Plus, I think that for India, the Quad had a military dimension, which is a problem because inside the Quad, you have two different, I mean, you also have Japan, much more cautious about everything military. I think that Japan is very comfortable with the Quad, focusing on softer security things like vaccine and so on, we mentioned before. For India, it's different. India is a military power, and it wants to build its own capability. There are a lot of maneuvers with the US, France, the Balaba exercise, and so on. So I think India definitely doesn't want to be categorized as a kind of soft power in the region, and especially facing the threat, direct threat, military threat from China. Of course, when we think of partnership between EU and the region Indo-Pacific, India is one of the major partners, including for France, including in terms of military cooperation. And I'm sure that many in France would argue that now that Australia is not interested anymore, India is definitely a good candidate to anchor even more than before France Indo-Pacific, defense of the Indo-Pacific strategy, and we also have territories in the Indian Ocean. So we can see maybe more an increased, even greater partnership between France, Europe, and India in the future.
Yes, my own experience of doing that 10, 15 years ago was not entirely positive. It was at the time of the EU-India FTA, and we did have a very different... and India, although like-minded and sharing values and the rest, is not the easiest of partners for the European Union, or indeed others too. That being said, what you just pointed to there is very important. This doesn't work, any of it, without active participation from India. David, would you have any perspective on that? I mean, Australia is always associated primarily with East Asia and ASEAN and so on, but the Indian relationship for Australia, how important is it for you?
Very important, and increasingly. I mean, Australia has, I mean, if you take even this term Indo-Pacific, which Australia was very much an early adopter of the term, it makes particular sense because Australia has a geography in which we have a coast on the Indian Ocean, another on the Pacific Ocean. But it was from the outset of its kind of entering into Australian strategic kind of language, was also intended to show the importance of India and within the kind of strategic system that Australia looks out on. That relationship has really grown significantly. Particularly, we see this very effective cooperation now taking place in the Quad, but bilaterally as well. We have a relationship which is really moving from strength to strength.
Well, we'll see. Of course, India, not the most popular country in the world after the COP26 results the other day, but it's an absolutely essential partner. We have to find ways, I'm sure, of working more with it. Gabrielle, would you have any comment on that aspect of it?
Yes, thank you very much, David. No, indeed. I would like to follow on what Valerie just said. India is a strategic partner of the EU already, and it's a key partner for the Indo-Pacific. We already spell it out in the Indo-Pacific Strategy, India in many of the key parts for cooperation. And indeed, as you said in a very diplomatic way, James, India is sometimes not the easiest partner to deal with, but we have to acknowledge that there has been a totally new positive momentum in our relations, in our EU-India relations after the summit last May in Portugal. And there, the leaders decided to resume, for example, as soon as possible, the negotiations on the FTA, which are stalled since 2013. And we are engaging also in various paths of enhanced cooperation on connectivities, and also, well, after COP26, it's a bit difficult to talk about positive, let's say, developments in environmental protection, but still, the fact that there is the mentioning of coal in the COP26 conclusion is already a novelty. So. Indeed, the centrality of India is there, but I would like to stress that there is a real positive momentum, which was not there before. So really, it's the fact of having the Leader Summit meeting last spring was a major breakthrough. It had not happened since many years, and this is really an encouraging development. And we are seeing really increasing avenues of cooperation, strengthening. Thanks.
Gabrielle, if I can stay with you just for a second. I mentioned the Asia-Europe meeting, ASEM, which is coming up in a couple of weeks' time.
Yep.
Clearly, there's a little bit of criticism going around with all of what's been happening in the last few months, AUKUS and so on, but it might be difficult this time. What is the perspective from the institutions on ASEM this time? Will it be a successful meeting? I mean, do you think that some sort of treatments can be made at the ASEM meeting to try to overcome some of these problems of trust and so forth?
Definitely. Already the fact that the summit takes place is already a positive development in its own. Indeed, my colleagues are currently negotiating the conclusions of the summit, the declaration. So, and the negotiations are advancing rather well, despite some last-minute, let's say, surprises, but some of the countries concerned, for example, China. But we are very confident that it will be a success. Already only 2 days ago, we were able to close 12 paragraphs of the final declaration. So it's going rather well. So we are very confident on having a good and positive outcome of the summit in 2 weeks' time. 10 days time.
Okay, one of the questions that's come in is taking us back again to this fundamental point, I think, which has happened here as the AUKUS story unfolds, is how did this happen in the first place, that allies as close as the EU, Australia, the US, UK, and so on, how did it happen that it came as a great surprise? Of course, I mean, one can be cynical about this, I suppose, and say that maybe people did have some idea what was going to happen, and that because of the commercial aspects, we saw what we saw. But whatever, there has been quite a bit of damage, which now needs to be cleaned up. There are efforts underway. I mean, you mentioned some yourself, David, with the meetings of the Prime Minister and talking with the President and so on. But surely there are lessons to be learned here about how to deal with each other, especially at times like these. And Valerie, you mentioned this, China, of course, very critical of the AUKUS arrangement, but also, of course, probably saying, well, that's what you get with the West these days. They can't even trust each other, let alone ask us to trust them. And of course, this also plays into the wider world, that the West is not really joined up in the way that it should. America may be back, but what is it back to? This question of trust is there. And this story, I'm afraid, has put us all in a difficult situation. And a couple of the audience are pointing to this, asking, why did it happen? How did it happen? What lessons can be learned? Can we come back to this and again go round here, maybe starting with you, Valerie? What's your view of that?
Well, I don't know if I'm the best position to answer the question, how did it happen? Maybe from Australia, the input will be more interesting. And, no, I think you're right. I mean, there is a commercial dimension, and I think it was also said that it would have been extremely difficult to share with the French the interrogation concerning nuclear submarines and so on, because it would not have been kept secret enough, and so it would not have been very helpful to achieve this new agreement of AUKUS. One of the questions that has been I saw asked by the French is that if indeed it was absolutely necessary for the Australian to have that kind of nuclear submarines instead of conventional submarines, why not open a new, how do you say, a new, I don't know, I forgot the name in French, in English, a nouvel appel d'offres. I mean, why not start again? Plus, when the decision was made, that deal with France, actually, Australia didn't want nuclear submarines that the French could have offered to Australia at that time. And so we could have discussed again, I mean, the deal with new capabilities. But I think I mentioned also our decision-making process in the US too. Maybe too much divisions between the people focusing on Asia Pacific, and focusing on China, the Indo-Pacific, and not contact enough with people dealing with Europe. It brings a very important issue related to the EU, NATO, of course, is the transatlantic relation, where also there, even though it's an extremely important relation, some people also question, there is a question of trust, and the asymmetric, of course, relationship between the US and Europe. And, the US asking Europe to be more involved in the Indo-Pacific, more interested, but if we are too much, not that happy about it. So, it's extremely, nobody seems to know exactly what their position should be on many issues, including, and of course, Indo-Pacific focuses all these frustrations because it's extremely important region, and this is where many threats, many kind of threats are. And of course, we cannot just decide that we are not interested in that region. We must be. And this is at the core, of course, of the EU Indo-Pacific strategy itself, even though we do not have the same military capability as the US have.
Gabrielle, care to comment? Sorry, Valerie, have you finished? I'm sorry, you had another point?
Yeah, I finished, yes.
Okay, thanks. Gabrielle, any reflection?
Yeah, I would like to have a forward-looking reflection. We have said a lot of what happened, so let's see a little bit in the future. And on the US, actually, there has been a positive spin after this. The US has acknowledged the clumsiness of the whole thing, but has also acknowledged the strategic interest in cooperating with each other and with the EU. And I would like to announce that the EU and the US have agreed in establishing a EU-US consultation on Indo-Pacific, alongside with the already established EU-US dialogue on China. And this will happen physically in Washington from the 1st till the 4th of December. And I will travel alongside with the Secretary General of the EAS, and we will have the talks with Wendy Sherman, the Deputy Secretary of State. So on Monday, we will have the dialogue on China, and then the following day, we will have the consultations on Indo-Pacific. And that goes exactly with what Valerie just said, the strategic importance of talking to each other, dealing each other, coordinating with each other. And if you allow me on this, and I would like to answer to what David said before, it's obvious that the EU and Australia are more than partners. I mean, we are liberal democracies, we are societies based on rule of law, we believe in an international rules-based order, we are Western liberal democracies. So that's, of course, there's more than interest in turning the page and going back to normal and even deepening further the cooperation. You mentioned the FTA, very welcome the fact that they will soon start negotiating again. And again, we will meet, we will have a high-level meeting already here in Brussels on the 24th of November. And we are sort of trying to let's say, create the conditions for going back to normal. But we are not there yet, as we have to acknowledge. But of course, we know what is the real interest and what is the real long-term interest. And here, between EU and Australia, it's win-win. It's not zero-sum. Thanks.
Thanks, Gabrielle. And David?
Well, thank you. I mean, I couldn't agree more with what Gabrielle just said there. Maybe just an additional kind of forward-looking thought, which is that the challenges that we are increasingly facing in the Indo-Pacific, but globally, have been growing, and the order is increasingly strained. There is more need for us, and Gabrielle's used the term Western liberal democracies. We share a lot in terms of outlook and values and interests. I think I would agree that we need to work more effectively together, but also that we need to find some new ways to do that as well. What I have noted around a lot of this kind of AUKUS comment in Europe, that a lot of it seems predicated on a fairly limited knowledge of Australia's own alliance relationship with the United States, as if it's sort of come as slightly as a surprise to people that Australia's had this 70-year alliance relationship with the United States, which has only been growing and deepening over the last decade, and then people have kind of woken up a little bit to this. Of course, many EU members, many countries in Europe belong to NATO. It's a different kind of alliance structure. The alliances the United States created in Asia work a little bit differently to the ones that are in the alliance system created in NATO. We need to talk to each other more. Some of the phenomena that we're trying to grapple with, some of them are geographic, others really don't know geography. If we start talking about cyber or critical technologies. And there is a need for us to invent and create new mechanisms to carry forward this work effectively, and not have it compartmentalized into a Euro-Atlantic and a sort of a US Asian allies kind of what's the right word? Into separate systems. That they need to talk to one another more. We need to find the right forms to carry forward the work that we want to carry forward.
Thanks, David. And to be faithful to our audience, let me, we've got about 10 minutes left. If anybody has any more questions, please put them in now. But a question has just come in because this relates a little bit to what David just said, but it's really for you, Valerie, and for you, Gabrielle, to comment. Our participant asks, will all of this bring the opportunity to work more on a European defense community to build its military capability? Valerie, maybe you'd like to address that.
No, well, actually, as I mentioned, I'm not really a specialist of Europe, so defense capability, I think, is something extremely difficult to achieve. We all know that. I just maybe tackle the concept that, because it was related to France a lot, that concept of strategic autonomy, just to say that it has often been misunderstood, especially in Asia, in some countries in Asia, or, you know, either because really people do not understand what it means, or because they do not want to understand what it means. Strategic autonomy doesn't mean that we do not want to side with the US against China or whatever, or we want to find a kind of neo-Gaullist troisième voie. It's not, absolutely not the case anymore. And what is very important for countries in the Indo-Pacific and in Asia particularly to understand is the extremely important evolution that the EU and France have had regarding China in recent years. I mean, today, no one would present China as exclusively an opportunity, and the position regarding China is far less naive than it used to be. And there is a consciousness regarding the China threat, not only in Asia, but also for Europe. So it's a big change. That is an extremely big change. And this is, of course, at the origin of this Indo-Pacific interest we have. So just to, it's not directly related to EU military capabilities, but it's a way also to understand that thinking about our own interests doesn't mean that we are not aware of what China is today, and it's destabilizing potential for all. So that's it.
Thanks, Valerie. Gabrielle, you care to comment on this? I mean, the point's been made. EU force projection is very limited outside of its own neighborhood, and even within the neighborhood, we have some difficulties, especially post-Brexit, to operate on that level. Although that may change in the future if ever the Brits come around to some sort of security arrangement, which they're not ready for at the moment. But in Asia, absent France and its own interest there, we are very, very limited as to what we can do in the military field, of course, hard military. But there are those that say that all of this means that we should be working harder on that. We should rebuild our navies. We should be out there sending aircraft carriers, whatever it may be, to keep the freedom of the seas and whatnot. What's your view?
Well, my personal, I will share it with you in front of a coffee. Let's talk about the EU.
Oh, don't worry. Let me tempt you.
No, actually, I would like maybe to first define a little bit the concept of strategic autonomy of the EU, because that is a very important starting point. When we talk about EU strategic autonomy, we never intend that the EU should have a big army of its own, which would substitute for NATO. Not at all. The strategic autonomy of the EU is, let's say, conceived and thought as the capacity of the EU to give itself the possibility to intervene when needed, but in cooperation and complementarily to NATO and the US. And this is something which is very well explained to our partners, to our allies, and it's also very welcomed by the US, because the US sees a stronger Europe as a stronger ally, and in a stronger complementary way. So its strategic autonomy should be seen as the capacity of the EU to give itself an enhanced possibility to deploy, but is not a willingness to substitute itself to the existing alliances. So that has to be crystal clear. The defense capabilities, yes, there is let's say, a push towards the development of defense capabilities, a push towards the EU and its member states to take over responsibilities for their own defense, but it should not be seen as an undertaking which is confrontational to China. This is a wider picture. It's a strategic choice, and it's not directed against one or another country. It's a geopolitical choice that the EU and its member states do on their own. So the discussion today is extremely timely because yesterday, I repeat myself, the High Representative presented the strategic compass policy, where the, let's say, basic lines for the development of the defense capabilities of the EU are spelled. The Indo-Pacific is there, and the strategic autonomy is well explained, as well as the interest of the EU to have a military, let's say, naval presence in the Indo-Pacific. We talk about protection of interest, as we said in our joint communication of the 16th of September. But in the strategic compass presented yesterday, we go a little bit further and we spell out how the enhanced naval presence could happen. So we are talking about, yes, port calls, joint exercises, the possibility of having third countries of the region participating in our CSDP mission, the existing CSDP mission, UNIFOR Atalanta. But we also come out with other initiatives, such as capacity building of the partners. But the biggest and most interesting new feature is the concept of coordinated maritime presence. We have an existing pilot project of this. Coordinated maritime presence is already happening in the Gulf of Guinea, and it's only member states take part to that. But we don't exclude in the future that the new coordinated maritime presences could be launched. The first is very likely to take place in the Indo-Pacific, actually in the Indian Ocean. And we are exploring the possibilities of having this new initiative, which is not a CSDP mission, open to third countries' participation. And this is a way of enhancing the naval/military presence of the EU. Again, understanding what strategic autonomy means, so not substituting for our major partners, and in a way to, let's say, being credible when we talk about the protection and defense of our interest. And on this, for example, look at David, we already have a framework agreement with Australia for the participation of Australia in the CSDP missions, and that could be, let's say, one of the let's say, closest possibilities to be explored for implementation. But let's see what the future brings.
Thank you, Gabrielle. That's probably a good note to start thinking about ending this discussion on. I've had myself, during my time as an EU official, I've had a lot of contact with the Atalanta operation, and we did it rather well, I thought, all things considered, but we did it with a huge challenge. Anyway, more of that.
If you allow me, David, this is really a great success story. It was the first ever military naval mission deployed by the EU. We set it up. Allow me to say it because I would really like also to give some positive notes about the EU capacity of deploying. Thanks to Atalanta, we actually defeated the piracy which was taking place there. So there were no attacks anymore on the World Food Organization vessels going to Somalia and Eritrea. We changed the rules of engagement, you know, very, very well. The first couple of years, we had to find our place there. Then when we finally changed the rules of engagement and we were able to destroy the pirates' boats ashore, which we were not able to do before, then that was the game changer. And actually, UNIFOR Atalanta is widely recognized as a major success. And we should really build from that experience, I think.
Fully agree. We had a little help from our friends, didn't we? Including from China. as I recall. Everybody had a common interest there. Anyway,
China participated. They more than once. Yeah.
But it's a good model perhaps to think about. But on the other hand, we have a huge challenge if we're going to contribute in the Indo-Pacific. I think we have to accept that as European Union. A final question has come in, which I don't think any of the speakers will want to answer, and it of course has to do with the EU-UK relationship and how AUKUS affects all of that. Well, I mean, allow me to take my hat off as a moderator and as a British citizen just to say to you, although I've worked 40 years in the EU, to say to you, this is not the time, it seems to me, for compromises coming from London anyway. A lot of talk about a security arrangement and so forth has been going on. Many people in the UK feel that this is overdue and we need to get down to it. Many people on the European Union side feel that as well. But it doesn't fit with the current government's agenda, which is not about compromise, it seems to me. But I will leave it there, and that's for another time. Gabrielle, you want to make a comment? Please go ahead.
Yeah, just a second on this. We have repeatedly said to our UK counterparts that we would be delighted and happy to cooperate also on security and defense. The answer from the UK has not been very encouraging. So as our High Representative said in the press conference where I was with him, he answered to this question, say, it takes two to tango. And for the time being, there's only one ready to dance. That's it.
Yeah, fair point. I think he's absolutely right. We're coming to the end. Are there any final remarks from our speakers on all of this? Valerie?
No, I'm nothing to add. Thank you very much for having me. It was a very fascinating, interesting debate.
Special thanks for you for giving up your evening in Tokyo.
No, it's all right.
I hope bonne continuation with your.
Merci. Merci.
And Gabrielle, thank you so much for giving us the time.
Thank you for having me.
No, David, was there anything you'd like to add?
No, just to thank you for my two fellow panelists for the conversation this morning. I mean, big and important issues, and it's good that we talk more about them.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Okay, well, thank you, and thank you to our audience. Thanks for joining us. Bon appétit tout le monde, whoever is going to have their lunch at this time. Not in Tokyo, but thank you very much, and have a good day.